Greetings from the far side of the galaxy. I'm Fuuri, your host of the most, here to bring you a story about titties. And these titties, they smell like steak. Before we get to today's Housamo hero, remember that I do these videos by request, so leave whichever one you want next in the comments below. For the next Housamo hero, we'll finally be redoing Houri Kuuri's video, but for now we have someone else. Today's Housamo hero is I still don't know any G words. That's a reference to the Gang Lee video. Go ahead and watch it to get the joke. But after you watch this one, okay? My lacking vocabulary aside, today's Housamo hero is the great demon king Gyumao. No spoilers from the main quest, but do be wary for the desert journey and Valentine's time slip event. Gyumao is a bold transient from the world of Hawaii, although in the English translation I think they've renamed it to Pink Lai Point Blank. Regardless of if you want to call it Hawaii or Penglai, it's the world based on Chinese mythology, folklore, and literature. I'm mentioning literature because Gyumao is specifically from a story, that being Journey to the West, but back to that later. Gyumao is affiliated with Roppongi Academy, although I'm 90% sure he's not a student or a teacher. He might be one of the few transients we can consider grown adults with real jobs that have nothing to do with school. Gyumao's job being tycoon. Specifically, he's a venture capitalist investing in startups that he views have potential for growth. You know the show Shark Tank? He's one of them dudes. He has his hooves, involved in just about everything. From milk tea to confections to sportswear to literal water parks, the Gyumao brand is anywhere and everywhere. He's the embodiment of a tycoon, which makes it quite fitting that he's also a member of the Roppongi Tycoons. Judging from the TSL venture, his closest partner is Hawkman, but he also has connections with the Berserkers. Specifically Snow, who helped him with his milk tea and chocolatiering endeavors. He also has direct ties to Arachne, and by extension, I suppose he has ties to Sathogwa as well. He's gained quite the foothold in this new world. His research file even states that he's the owner of the fastest growing business in Tokyo. Or he was until Fushi did his thing in chapter 12. Wonder if we're ever going to get any closure on that, or if it's going to be like that murder from chapter 2. That being said, I do hope Gyumao manages to get his business back on its feet. He's a really good boss. His research file says that one of his favorite pastimes is finding tired, overworked employees and helping them flourish. Perhaps that was one of the reasons he was so hell-bent on helping Arachne and Seaside Fashionista. We don't know his rule or role, but his artifact are those horns on his head. Back in his home world, Gyumao was actually enormous, but the game won't let him be like that in Tokyo. So instead, he's normal people sized in Tokyo, but he can regain a glimmer of his former girth, wink wink, thanks to his artifact. It lets him grow as big as a skyscraper, but he mostly uses his artifact for intimidation, just like how he did in his home world. You see, Gyumao wasn't always a savvy businessman. Back in his home world, he was actually a demon king. That's due to the person he's based on, the central antagonist of Journey to the West of the same name, Gyumao. Let me fulfill that promise I made earlier and tell you about Journey to the West. Journey to the West is a popular Chinese story following the Buddhist monk Sanzang and his 3 allies as they go to retrieve Buddhist scriptures. It's primarily episodic, with the crew meeting a problem, usually modeling it, and then moving on. Gyumao is one of those problems, but what makes him different is that he gets to make multiple appearances, thus earning him the title of Journey to the West Big Bad. Although he's actually more like Vicious from Cowboy Bebop, showing up rarely and infrequently but having a huge impact when he does. What he does can be summed up very succinctly. That's how little he's actually in the story. In the past, a bunch of demon lords including Sun Wukong became sworn brothers with Gyumao, with him at the lead. Following that, he gets married to Princess Iron Fan, whose fans were actually made out of banana leaves, and had a son, Red Boy. Weird name for a kid, but I'm not an ox demon from ancient China, so what the fuck do I know? After Sanzang and friends begin their journey, Sun Wukong disguises himself as Gyumao to steal the fan from Iron Fan. When Gyumao learns of this, he disguises himself as Zhu Baiji to steal it back. He gets back his wife's fan right before his cover is blown and a battle begins. However, Nezha and the Jade Emperor's bodyguard arrive to arrest him before anything can really conclude. Honestly, kind of a weird way to go out, especially since the book doesn't shy away from our protagonist killing demons and stuff. With that being said, let's take a look at Life Wonder's interpretations. Just like with Gang Lee in my last video, you may have noticed that Gyumao and Gyumao are the same person. Although it's worth noting that Gyumao was taken from the end of his story while Gang Lee was taken from before the beginning. This actually caused Gyumao to recognize Gang Lee, albeit in a one-sided fashion. And while I can't say for certain, the whole thing in the TSL was based on Gyumao's life, so I suppose he did have a wife and son. And also, Gyumao was supposed to be a white ox, and all I'm gonna say is that this transient definitely has an inward pass. And I suppose Gyumao's sacred artifact is not only a reference to his size in the story, but his ability to shapeshift. Not quite sure why they chose to make him a businessman though. Maybe it's because capitalism is the real evil or something, who knows. One thing I do find interesting is that the Ox King's main motivation for attacking the party is different from most antagonists. He doesn't seek immortality, rather revenge on Wukong for his betrayal and turning his son to the good side. This penchant for revenge is evident in the transient Gyumao when just the name San Zhang is enough to set him off. While we don't get to see it, a lot of the same plot points from Journey to the West evidently did happen to Gyumao. He mentions his brother turning against him, a reference to Sun Wukong being a former Demon King alongside Gyumao. I'm not sure what the scar is a reference to, but a difference is that Gyumao wasn't killed in the original story. And the fact that he lives in Gaocheng is probably a reference to something, but I don't know enough Chinese to figure it out. Now, let's move on from that and get into Gyumao's backstory. Picture this, you're a king whose crown has just fallen. Betrayed by a brother, tricked by a pig, and now killed by a monk. But as your head falls to the ground, you're consumed by a rainbow light and transported to Tokyo. And yeah, that's kind of it. Gyumao doesn't really have much of a past to share. I suppose he and Gang Lee are the same in that regard. What I find interesting is that it appears most of Gyumao's arc actually happened in Tokyo. He does mention in the Valentine's event that what he wanted most was love from those around him and to give it in return. But we have no idea what led to that epiphany. Something happened that made him go from Demon King to businessman. And frankly, I kind of wish we got to see that. Although, I suppose now is as good a time as any to get to Gyumao's character analysis. Although I suppose I've kind of already done it. Gyumao is quite the interesting character, mostly because he's taken at the end of his story. This means a lot of his actions are colored by an unseen character growth. And since his character arc is already done, Life Wonders decided to use him to help other characters finish theirs. And it appears that Life Wonders likes to do this with their characters that are actually adults, like a Matsumara or Mononobe. What really separates him from other characters with similar motivations is his very hands-on approach to it. While Mononobe gives advice, he leaves it up to them whether or not they follow it. Think of the time he told the protagonist not to let the game consume them. Gyumao takes a more action-based approach, adjusting behaviors to slowly adjust outlook. Think of the way he forces his subordinates to give calm and orderly reports. Perhaps that's how Gyumao became the man, the bull, he is today. After somehow coming to whatever epiphany he had about love, he slowly adjusted his behavior, channeling a lot of his hooligan tendencies into something more constructive, like business. Kind of relating to this, I do like how they show that progress is not 100%. Gyumao is still prone to some of his worst tendencies and has to make an active effort to stay who he is. And honestly, I really like what they did with Gyumao as a CEO. He's a fantastic boss that really seems to take everyone's well-being into account. Like when he told Seth that one of the most important things for a worker to do is rest. Despite him being the cause of the collision and being necessary to fix it, he didn't force him into the fight. I swear if Gyumao caught sight of Arachne towards the end of her event, he would have tranked her with a blow dart. I kid. Gyumao actually has a lot of respect for safety laws and things like that. I suppose that's a thing he and Anvari have in common. If only bosses in the real world had things in common with them. I do wish we actually got to see Gyumao grow and change rather than just the person he is now. An event focusing on a character learning to channel their bad habits into something constructive actually sounds like a pretty good event. While Gyumao is a good character at the end of his arc, I feel that actually allowing us to see it would have made for a much stronger impression. If there's ever an event that has us go back into the past, seeing a younger Gyumao would be wonderful. Not sure what a younger Gyumao's unit would look like, but we do know what current Gyumao's units do, so let's get right on into them. Business Daddy has 3 units, 2 normal and 1 limited from the Valentine's Time Slip event. Beginning with his normal 3-star like we always do, he's a fire attribute and blow type unit. His skills are as follows. First is Blood of the Beast, and I'm not telling you what that does for the 1000th time. If you don't know what Housamo's bicycle does by now, God help your soul. After that is Hulking Lord, which lets him apply Drain and take up to 1000 HP and 50 CP from hit units. As an offensive skill, it's kind of nutty. He basically kicks whatever enemy he hits in the dick and ensures they can't stand up for a while. I approve. His third skill, Celestial Hothead, has 2 after moving skills. He applies Archer to allies in a 1 square radius at 80% and gives up to 20 CP at 100%. The CP is meh, but I've always been a slut for Archer. His final skill is Proprietor. He gets crit to himself at phase start and takes reduced damage from thrust type enemies. Reduced damage from thrust attacks. Never would have imagined that Gyumao's a bottom. His next normal unit is a 5-star that's fire attribute and long slash type. It has all of the same skills except for the last one where Proprietor is replaced by Eloquent Speaker. However, Eloquent Speaker also has a skill evo into Eloquent Speaker Plus, so I'm just gonna go ahead and cover that one. To begin, it upgrades the crit at phase start to crit plus, and it also keeps the bottom's blessing. What's new is that after moving, he applies break and long slash range at 80% and break to enemies 1 square ahead and long slash range at 40%. I know that range sounds insane, so I'm just going to show you these squares and pray you understand them. I definitely have some thoughts, but before we get to those, let's move on to his limited unit. His limited unit is a 4-star from the Valentine's Time Slip event. In the event story, it's taken from when Gyumao explains how he'd like to give his lover chocolate. But in his SQ, it shows up when he gives the player chocolates after cooking them dinner at his high-rise. Because I'm a real nice guy, I'll leave a link to the Housamo English Archives video of it down below. It's another attribute and 1 type 4-star, and its first skill is as follows. After moving, Love for All gives up to 200 HP to himself and allies in a 2 square cross range at 90%. And he also gives nourishment to allies in a 1 square around himself at 80%. I feel like the 2 guys who make milk being able to give nourishment to allies is indicative of a joke I can't make on YouTube. His next skill is King of Gao Cheng, and it has 3 parts. At phase start, there's a 90% chance for up to 40 CP to himself, and when attacking, he applies Oppression at 80%. And after moving, he applies Limit to allies ahead and behind himself at 90%. It's a weird triage of skills, but I'm not gonna complain too much about nothing having 100% proc because why does none of it have it? Up next is Enterprising Entrepreneur. He has increased horizontal movement and applies acceleration to adjacent allies at 90%. Honestly, it's a really good skill for those wide stages, you know? His final skill is Unstoppable Force. After moving, he gets tenacity to himself at 100%, resist all forced movement, and is immune to immobility. Well I'll be damned. That skill really does make him an unstoppable force. Okay, so let's review the units starting with the normals. Honestly, they're not that bad, his 3-star being the worst of the 2 because blow type is the worst kind of attack. His 5-star fixes that with long slash, and he deals 2 different statuses in both break and drain over a pretty good range. That means he works freakishly well with beachside Volos who gets a damage boost from both statuses. His limited unit is more of a jack-of-all-trades kind of fighter. This of course comes with the trade-off of team building being kind of hard for him. Thankfully, he works super well with Tsurada since he can apply nourishment strengthening to your entire team. His complete resistance to any movement skills also means he can work well on any quest filled with enemies that like to move your guys. In total, Gyumao got treated pretty well unit-wise, with 2 out of 3 being fairly good. Finally, let's wind this video down with Gyumao's relationship chart. To begin, no one likes Gyumao. And one person does dislike Gyumao, that being Gang Li. That's because he makes the poor pig actually work, and because, you know, he was the bad guy in Journey to the West. On the other hand, Gyumao likes quite a few people. He likes Envari because they're both businessmen, and Hawkman because they're both business partners. And Heracles because he likes his work ethic and desire to overcome his past. And Gyumao dislikes Gang Li and Hanuman since the two of them kinda were his enemies in Journey to the West. And real quick, before we finish, Gyumao has no loading screen, so here's an obligatory fun fact. His limited unit's title is the Passionate Bougainvillea, a reference to the flower, the Bougainvillea, which I'm 90% sure you can see in his artwork. Anyways, the flower not only represents passion but free trade, explaining Gyumao's connection to it. Overall, I think Gyumao's a pretty cool dude. Wish we got to see more of his arc when he arrived in Tokyo, but I do love to see him interact with other characters. He's always such a force for positive change, and his direct action approach makes him different from other life advice kind of characters. And it's really nice to see a character who's a moral businessman. It's just a breath of fresh air. After saying that, I'd be remiss not to give Gyumao Fuuri's official seal of approval. Thank you for watching, and do be sure to like and subscribe and check out some of my other stuff. Okay, hey, Future Fuuri here. It's 2 AM on a Sunday, and if I could be drunk, I would be. I'm here for 2 reasons. 1, I forgot to do the Patreon shoutouts, and 2, I'm switching it from Housamo to Tetsuox. So look forward to that Housamo Hero video at some point, and let's get on to the Patreon shoutouts. We have special thanks to Zoro Ichao, 87 Werehog, and Prisma 144. Still no 4 stars, yada yada, it's always been like this. And now for our super special awesome 5-star Patreon shoutouts. First up is Poor Mage, who got bit by a vampire and all they got was this lousy t-shirt. Then we have Unknown RC, who's going ghost. After that is Vanilla Flower, who knows it's Thriller Night. And finally, Mahagasaur, who's the mash eating, the slash cleaning, the hash slinging slasher. Merry spooky month to you all, and to all a good fright. And as always, this is your host Fuuri, signing out.